Hey everyone, I'm AJ, co-founder and CEO of Parcha.
I'm John Baunach, head of design here at Parcha.
Today we wanted to talk to you a little bit about how we created Agent Hub, and more importantly, how we did it all by redesigning our whole product without using Figma. That's right. We redesigned our whole product using Cursor, and John's going to talk about exactly how we did it and why. John, tell me about a little bit about your background in design and when you started using Cursor.
Yeah, I've been doing product design for over 20 years with startups as well as enterprise companies. And so I've been using all the different tools, started with Illustrator and Photoshop, then we went into Sketch, and then obviously went into Figma. And Figma was massive. But then Cursor came along, and I think that was like 4 or 5 months ago when our team jumped into it. Ever since we started jamming on it on an offsite where we were doing a little hackathon, I could just go way faster and make a lot more progress.
That's where this whole thing started. We were doing this thon to work out how we could get customers onboarded onto Parcha faster with a self-serve experience. And everyone jumped into Cursor and came up with different ideas. And it was the first time that we really set you up with Cursor instead of having to design all your ideas in Figma. And that was the beginning of this whole journey that moved us from Figma, which we had been using for design for the first year and a half of our company's existence. And obviously a long time before that, both of us have a lot of familiarity with it, to now using Cursor as our primary design tool.
The engineering team has been using Cursor a lot longer than I had. Miguel, our CTO, was like, here's one single prompt that you're going to write in. It was basically like, use React, Byte, and pick a design system you like, set it up, and then my system was ready to go. I just gave it a single prompt of, I wanted to work on maybe like a case management system. Just kind of knew what that looked like, started typing those things in, and sure enough, like it was already building out the infra and the framework of what I needed.
Yeah, I think that was the most surprising thing to me, is that we got a lot of stuff going in the space of a day. And I think a big part of that as well is that we decided to use Shadcn, right? And then we used TypeScript. So we had it all set up really to mirror exactly how our front end would work, so that we could easily pull the code between what you designed and what we would eventually build.
Right.
Can you tell me the secret to how you design with Cursor?
Before you can get to that, a lot of times you have a design system. Like teams have a design system that they leverage. They might have it all built out, but they have the components. So they're using stuff like a Shadcn component library to start and then work with. You just now have it accessible in Cursor, and it's working, it's functional, it's responsive, it's accessible. So you kind of get all that stuff for free. Now, it doesn't mean you only get those pieces, but it's a good foundation. And I think the next part of it, to your question about how you bend it to your will, is it is helpful to understand how these components are built. Like, how does the actual front end experience work? And then you can kind of talk to it, just like you might be thinking about it in Figma, where it's like you're using padding, you're using auto layout, you're saying like, I want to expand it this way, or I want it to fill or hug. You can use those types of language to have it do what you want in Cursor. And so I think having the language from a design system will help you a lot to get it to do what you want it to do.
I think that's a big piece of why when you're using it as a designer, it's very different from what I'm using as an engineer, because you have that language that you use all the time when you're thinking about design, even in Figma, but now you're bringing it into Cursor. Let's jump in there and show everyone what that even looks like, actual engineering implementation too.
Yeah, and I think something that was really cool is you can have Cursor basically set up a mock database. So if you know the entities that you want to use, you can give it some definition on that. It does know kind of broader spaces. So we work in compliance. I can tell it a little bit about the use case, and it can generate that broader database as a mock database for us to then build on top of. We had 2 use cases that we wanted to start with: setting up an agent from a template, and the other is, what does it look like when you've actually ran that agent? So first, let's go through setting up an agent. So now we have this setup portion where we take a template, and what we have is the ability to configure it. So we have all these checks here that, again, I designed in Cursor. So I just defined what each one of these checks would be. I would go in and say, some of these need to be configurable. I would provide those parameters and then give it the ability to add more steps, some rails to say these all should look pretty much the same. Let's reuse as many components as we can. We get into the notion of the risk criteria. It can actually tell you what are the required data inputs to ultimately let these checks run, show you what that agent's going to look like. We actually added in credits after the fact. So now we even can put in some of this animation. So that was a total cursory animation where I just gave it some description of like, I wanted to sort of mimic that idea of it working, because I knew when we're going to build this thing and it actually is running, it's going to take a second to build that. You can feel what it's going to feel like for an end user, and you can put in that lag time to really understand that.
That's one thing that honestly is really mind-blowing about designing Cursor. Anyone that sees this prototype would think that this was the actual product, but it's not. No front-end engineer was involved in building this. You designed the whole thing, used Cursor to actually create it, and now we then take that code and we give it to Sam, a front-end engineer, and he basically just ports it all over and implements it. And so our actual product looks almost exactly the same as this prototype. But the nice thing about having a separate prototype is that you can play with it, you can change things, and it doesn't impact anything to do with our actual engineering production workspace. So it just gives you the freedom to really experiment in any way you want to without having to worry about versioning and things like that.
I had the ability to then manage things that I pushed and even branching, and then everybody else on the team had access to it. So they could then go and leverage it, right?
And that's how we implemented the first version of our dashboard. If you want to look at the dashboard quickly, John created this whole dashboard over a weekend, and I think it was about 2 or 3 hours. I had Claude Code go in, implement the whole dashboard, all of the back end to pull all the queries just by looking at this prototype. And that was pretty cool. And it looks almost exactly the same. So the power of being able to just go straight from design idea to prototype and then straight into engineering and do the back end in essentially like, that's really crazy. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about what the prototype looks like, but honestly, I just want to know how the magic happens. Can you show me how you go about prompting Cursor to get you this type of output, maybe for a new feature that we're working on?
Yeah, if we go and look at what our agents look like once they run a job is a bunch of cases of, let's say, a business or an individual, and we're doing a huge background checks, or it could be a small check. But this has a pretty exhaustive list of all the checks we do. And they have their own experience on each one of those flyouts. You have activity log, etc. A big thing that we care about here at Parcha is accuracy and making sure that the checks that we provide are actually helpful and they actually are correct. What we needed to have is an in-app feedback functionality. This is something I had designed before. People design it all the time, but there's nuances to all the different ways you can get feedback. Tell us what it is. If it's a thumbs up, generally people aren't going to say like, oh, it was right. You don't need to actually submit additional feedback, but you could if you wanted to. Now, let's say that it is actually something that's negative. We do need you to actually give us some feedback. Like, let's say that this MCC is totally incorrect.
Yes, that means like we got the wrong merchant categorization code in the AI agent.
So all of this happened with me giving a prompt to start off saying, okay, what this means is each flyout should have the feedback component as part of the default flyout pattern. So I wanted to make sure, look, we're not going to do this one by one. Like, let's use a consistent pattern across the board. And the user should be able to thumbs up or thumbs down the flyout and give a reason why they gave that feedback. So that's where we started. I think that what's interesting is as you work through it, it's going to understand your terminology for the things you're building. And so what I do is I try to reinforce those terminologies for specific components.
Okay, what happened next?
Awesome. I should be able to see that I've provided feedback after the fact and also edit my feedback. So now it's given me an initial pass. Maybe I didn't put everything, the whole thing in. And that's something I've also learned. Like if you put too many things in all at once, like try to define the whole application, it's going to freak out a little bit. What I found is like, let's get the crux, let's get the general thing, the initial job to be done. And then that gives the structure. And then you can start adding elements, which is exactly how I would design or build anything anyway. You're being additive. So you're being mindful of breaking down the problem. And one thing I've also learned that's really good is if I'm working on sort of a big prompt and I'm going to move on to a different project, part of the app, or it's like this thing's gotten massive and I'm going to start a new window, I'll ask it to create a summary of all the work it's done and tell it, hey, I'm going to start a new chat. Can you provide the right information that when I go start this new chat, they will have enough context? This is like a worker that's going to have to get onboarded and understand the code base and understand what you're doing and understand the things that have been done and understand your parlance, if you will. And so you can ask it to provide like a super condensed thing like that, start your next chat with that. And then it's already got a bunch of information that it can kind of help it navigate through your code base. Because this was the first project. So it kind of like when I first went in, it was monolith. So then I came back to the first principles of design and it's like, hey, think about this as a componentized thing. Like we need to simplify this and make this the most optimized application. And so I basically did a refactor project on this. And I told him like, hey, with these mindset, let's do a refactor. Tell me how you can make this thing optimized. Like this thing's massive. How can we redo the whole thing? So I ran a couple of different processes to get it so it like cleaned out a bunch of stuff that wasn't being used, systematized everything to be a little bit more consistent, and also like say componentized in a way that had its modules.
So you're kind of refactoring this prototype in the same way that a front-end engineer would refactor their code. So it's almost like you've now become somewhat of an engineer yourself. You showed us this feedback experience and it's totally clickable. Somehow the data is all being stored. We don't really know what happens behind the scenes. Cursor's built enough functionality that we can get an understanding of how it works. And then the other big area is we wanted to aggregate all this feedback into some kind of table, right? And were you able to get design that as well?
I might have had to add some things around advanced filtering for multiple agents and being able to manage the different agents. But yeah, it's basically like, okay, we have all that feedback. Now you're somebody that's going to want to be able to look at that and aggregate, provide a dashboard view of that so that I can see it at a line item level as well as a roll up, be able to filter it by the different parameters we have. And this is what it came up with.
That's another thing I just love about using this design approach is that we can just get it in front of customers really quickly and just get them using it. And then they can provide us feedback in this case on what's working and what isn't. The other thing I love is that Cursor just goes in and puts all this fake data in. So it's way easier to know what it's going to look like. And then the next step of this is that you basically push this update into GitHub. And then I, as an engineer, can just pull down that GitHub. And from there, I can ask Claude Code to go and implement it. So we're going to just quickly show how that can be done here. So on my computer now, I'm going to be in Cursor as well, which is where I work, but I'm using Claude Code in Cursor, which is my favorite combo. And then what I'm going to do is I have this prototype open now. So I'm just going to pull the latest updates and I can see there's been 7 new updates. And then I'm going to go into Claude and now I'm going to ask it to go and implement that feedback. We're going to give this a shot. So it's San Francisco, we would like you to implement the new feedback and you can see how it should work in the prototype here. And then all I do is I just point to this prototype here. I just get the path for it and I paste it in. So I'm just going to point to this one file, ask it to get going, and it's going to take a look. That's really how engineering of a new feature now starts. Oftentimes there's going to be a back-end piece of it. There's going to be a front-end piece of it. So we might use multiple different sub-agents in code to kind of come up with a plan first and really take it from there. And that's how we get started with vibe coding.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll ever go back?
No. I think, look, like I said, I don't think like Figma goes away. There's sometimes where things get a little, like if you're trying to do something very advanced, it's helpful to use Figma to sort of wireframe out some things like, hey, this structure, like you're doing it this way, I need it this way.
Yeah. And I think as both a product person and a founder, I don't think we as a company can ever go back either because I'm just too impatient now. Like if I had to wait for you to go and design all of this in Figma and then go through prototypes in Figma, it would just take way too long. This is like way faster, it's more efficient. And the most important thing is we can get it to engineering, get it built out, and then get it in front of our customers as quickly as possible. I think building Agent Hub would probably been a 6-month if it wasn't for this approach. And so we at least maybe as final kind of question, do you have any advice for using Cursor? How do you even get started?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably tons of videos out on this now, but I think a simple prompt to sort of set up your environment, I would say just to easily get started and play around, Shadcyan is a great design system to leverage as well as maybe material. Just using some of the ones out there that are very well known and sort of well supported. The LLMs can leverage that really well. And then I'm using React and TypeScript or Vite or Vercel, getting your system set up with a simple prompt of like, here's what you should use and just kind of hone it in and tell it, don't go all off the willy-nilly. These are your fundamental tools. Stay on this. And then just like you would in your design system, leveraging it's just like, you can tell it to think like leveraging a design system. And then you're off to the races. I'd say just give it a try. You'd only need that super simple setup and then just pick a random use case you want to do and get going.
Amazing. So we just walked through our full product and created Agent Hub, which lets you create, customize, and deploy AI agents for compliance workflows. John's all in on vibe designing.
Yes.
And we hope you enjoyed this little behind the scenes look at how we did it.